All right, how's it going, everyone? So for today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate how to rebuild a brake caliper. So what I have is I have a brake caliper off of a 2009 Dodge Ram. What had happened with this particular truck is the ABS control unit hydraulic pump stuck on, and it actually stuck these two pistons on, and it burned the pads up and it caused them to overheat. As you can tell, the dust shield is super brittle and there's not much left. So the brake calipers got replaced on the truck. This is a good candidate though for a rebuild though. So what I'm going to go through is I'm going to go through the process in rebuilding this caliper. Now, there's not much that goes into rebuilding them. We're just going to have to pop the pistons out and replace the two seals. So I got a rebuild kit. The rebuild kit comes with our inner piston seals and then our dust seals, and that's really basically it. We are going to hone the bore of the pistons to make sure that we have a nice crosshatch and that the seals and the piston slide in it nice and smooth. We're also going to check for scoring and anything like that. Anytime you have a brake caliper failure like this, it's a good idea to double check that. A couple warnings to go into this. This is a pretty simple procedure to do, but you need to make sure you're doing your due diligence, not overboring the brake, the piston bores. You make sure the seals are all in, and making sure you're hydraulic checking it before you go drive the vehicle. So that requires putting it on the car, pumping the brakes up, bleeding the brakes of all the air, and then double checking to make sure there's no liquid leaking out of these, because this is a pretty big safety concern if these have a rebuild issue. That's why this isn't a really commonplace issue anymore, or a commonplace repair, because not a lot of people are going to be doing this kind of repair, simply because calipers are pretty cheap and there's a liability that goes along with it. So what we'll end up doing is we're going to end up applying pneumatic pressure to this port right here, which is our brake line feed, and we're going to be doing that while we have a block of wood to catch the pistons. Now, the reason why we're doing this is if I were to just to have the piston or the block of wood out and shoot the pistons with air, they'd go flying, and typically one's going to come out and the other one won't, and then it makes it really difficult to get these out. It also becomes a fairly big safety hazard. These pistons aren't made of steel, they're phenolic, so they will crack really easily if they hit anything. So having the block of wood is a safety thing for you as well as the components. You can mount it into a vise. Either way, you're going to be applying air. So we're going to apply air to this port, and we should hear a pop. So there's our two pistons popping out. So what we have is we've had them wedged against the block of wood, so we're just going to try to wiggle the wood out. Now, the pistons aren't all the way out of their bore, so we are going to have to walk them out slightly. So they came out fairly easy. So our next step is going to be to remove the seals inside of this and getting it ready for honing. We're going to look at the pistons though and make sure there's no big grooves in them or anything. You don't really want to sand these down. Like I said, these are either going to be an aluminum with an anodized coating on it, so that they're nice and slippery, or they're going to be a phenolic material, and if you sand it down, you'll put grooves in it, making it porous. Brake fluid can actually go through it, and or it can bind up. So you just wipe these down and you clean everything with clean brake fluid. So we'll look at both pistons, make sure they're okay. Like I said, this is a good candidate for a rebuild only because they stuck on because the hydraulic control unit gave it constant pressure. So those both look all right. Now, depending on the type of seal that is in the caliper, they're either going to have a hard lip or they're going to have a soft lip. So you sometimes need to pry these out to pop these dust shields out. There's one. And there's our last one. And those are trash. So then what we're left with is we're left with two piston seals. So these are in the bore of the cylinders themselves. So you just grab a pick and pull these out. Now, it's a good idea to not cut these or rip these if they're intact, because we're going to size these up with the ones that we'll be replacing. So now what we're left with is the empty caliper. We can look down the bores and see if there's any big scoring or anything along those lines. What it just looks like to me is it looks like the fluid's just a little bit burned. I don't see any major pitting or anything. So we're probably all right with that. So what we'll then do is we'll then machine it with our hone. We're going to use a brake cylinder hone. So this is a small 3-stone hone that you're going to attach to an electric drill, and you're going to put it at a relatively slow speed as to not have it cut too fast. We're going to be going up and down in the bore with this hone. You only need to do it a little bit. Essentially what all we're doing is we're taking the glazing that is formed by heat of that piston going up and down, as well as giving it a nice crosshatch pattern, so there's an irregular surface so the fluid can't get past it. So we're really only going to do it for a couple seconds. One of the other things that I've noticed with honing cylinders in an engine is when you're done, you never just stop in the middle and pull it out, because then you'll scrape with the stone. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and out and pull it out while it's still active. Now we want to make sure we're not hitting the other end so we don't damage the stone. The other thing to note is we need some lubrication on these stones. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be lubricating it with brake fluid. You don't want to use any other solvents or cleaners or anything, because it can corrupt the brake fluid when the vehicle goes back to being in service. So want to get the stones kind of wet. This brake fluid I'm dipping the stones in, it's not going to be used for the vehicle, it's simply being used for the machining. And then we're going to just dump a little in the cylinders. We'll go through. The tension on my hone is already set as well. You can set that by turning in the tension rod right there. So again, we're going to go up and down with the stone inside the hone for about 15 seconds. All right, and so we'll wipe this cylinder clean. We're good with this one. Now we'll just got to do the next one. Same thing. A little bit of brake fluid inside of there. All right, yeah, so we got all that remaining glazing out, so that's good and nice and clean. So now what we do need to make sure we're doing is we need to make sure we're cleaning out all of the grit from the honing stones. So this does shed a little bit of the friction lining that comes off of these stones, so we do need to make sure that's completely out of it, or we could rip the seal. I don't like dipping these in hot tanks simply because I don't want to put anything else in it that it might not need. So cleaning it with fresh brake clean and some brake cleaner will pretty much do the trick. All right, so we're looking pretty clean there. If you run your finger across it, it doesn't feel gritty. So we're ready to start reinstalling all of this. Again, our pistons were looking okay. They didn't look like they needed much attention of anything. So next we're going to do is we're going to get into our seal kit. Now the seal kit's a good seal kit with the exception of one thing. Anytime you take these brake calipers off, you need to replace the 2 copper crush washers, and unfortunately this kit doesn't come with them. So that is something to try to pay attention to. Try to look at the description of the kits. I was looking online and not many of these kits came with that. So what we have is we have 2 new dust seals and 2 new piston ring seals. Now we're going to want to get these a little bit wet with brake clean, or sorry, brake fluid, not brake clean. That would be counterproductive. To put them in their bore, and all it essentially is we're just getting it nice and lubricated so it will swell a little bit, and just putting it into its groove. First one's there. Alright, so is our second one. So now what we got to do is install each piston. Ideally, if this was going in the same vehicle, we'd want to install each piston in the same location that it came out of. With the hone though, we should be all right tolerance wise. These pistons should be, the specification for them is 2.2 millimeter, or sorry, 220 millimeters is the diameter of these pistons. Now we want to try to get these in as square as possible to aid in installing them and getting them to go down on their bore. What I found works really pretty well is if you use a piston compressor, like if you were servicing the brakes. So if it doesn't start to go, there we go. Should be good. Now I'm not going to push it all the way in because I found it's easier to get the dust seals on with them still out a little bit so you can get it in its groove. So we'll do the second piston. Same thing, we're not going to get it all the way down, because what we need to do with these dust seals is we need to not only get it on the inner lip of the piston, we need to get one end inside of the bore. So I found it's usually easier, and I can tell you this is probably the hardest part of the job, is getting these dust seals to go on without ripping them, because it can be very frustrating. Again. So we're pretty good with the seals there. So now what we'll do is we'll compress each piston all the way, ready for new pads. Alright, so there we have it. We have a freshly rebuilt caliper, and that's all that's to it. As I stated before, the only other thing that we would need is we're going to need 2 crush washers for each soft brake line to round out the complete rebuild. The kit that I got with these O-rings was only, I think, $3.60 per caliper. So it's really pretty good price for really minimal amount of work. Again though, I can't stress to you enough making sure that you get everything back in the way that it's supposed to be in, and make sure you're hydraulic checking this before you go drive the vehicle or send a customer out in the vehicle and potentially have an issue down the road. So for this job to be complete, we would have to again reinstall the caliper onto the caliper hanger with fresh pads. Hopefully the rotor's machined. We would put in new crush washers for the soft brake line, fully bleed the system of all its air, and then give it a good test drive to bed in both pads and then double check for leaks. Where they'd be leaking from is they'd be leaking from around the pistons if we got it too far, or if we grooved anything along those lines. So we'll leave this at that. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I appreciate you taking the time to watch, and I'll see you in the next one.